Good morning. We have two readings today. One is from the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, and the other is from the Gospel of Matthew. Let's hear the one from Isaiah 53, verse 1 through 6 first. The prophet says this. He says, "Who would have believed what we have just heard? Who saw the Lord's power in this? He grew up like a small plant before the Lord, like a root growing in a dry land. He had no beauty or form to make us notice him. There was nothing in his appearance to make us desire him. He was hated and rejected by people. He had much pain and suffering. People would not even look at him. He was hated and we didn't even notice him, but he took our suffering on him and felt our pain for us. We saw his suffering and thought God was punishing him, but he was wounded for the wrong we did. He was crushed for the evil we did. The punishment which was made us well was given to him, and we were healed because of his wounds. We all have wandered away like sheep. Each of us has gone his own way, but the Lord has put on him the punishment for all the evil we have done." Now the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verses 9 through 13. It says, "When Jesus was leaving, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth. And Jesus said to him, 'Follow me.' And he stood up, and he followed Jesus. As Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with Jesus and his followers. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked Jesus' followers, 'Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?' And when Jesus heard them, he said, 'It is not the healthy people who need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I want kindness more than I want animal sacrifices, and I did not come to invite good people, but to invite sinners.'" Good morning. What a busy week we had here this past week at church, didn't we? Last Sunday we had two baptisms, one from the Watson family and the other from the Schaefer family, with all of their friends and families here. Tuesday night we had our election day and night dinner. Still more people came to our church. And this past Saturday we had a carnival and a craft fair here. And although I wasn't here for that, I heard that there were a lot of local folks who came to see what the vendors had. And also we had the vendors themselves. All in all, it was a pretty packed week for our church. For a moment, though, I want to put those events aside because I want to talk to you about those things more towards the end of the message today, because first I want to tell you a story that you may not have heard me tell you before. And for those of you who might have heard the story, I apologize for repeating myself, but it's an important story, so it's worth telling twice or three times. And the reason I like it is because it has to do with how God acts in our lives, even when we're not aware of him being here. It's a belief many pastors have, including John Wesley, and that is that God is present in our lives whether we recognize it or not, and sometimes even before we become aware of him. It's the belief that God is constantly reaching out and seeking us and waiting for us to reach out to him, to take his hand and to allow him to do his work. And we can always all probably say that we've had that happen in our lives at least once. At least once in our lives we've sensed that. It's sort of the opposite of thinking that God is not present when we're seeking him. And then all of a sudden finding him and realizing that it wasn't him that was missing, that it was us who lost sight of him. Anyway, I'm digressing. About 12 or 13 years ago now, your pastor, the person standing right here in front of all of you, was not a Christian. I didn't have a religion. I didn't go to church, and I really had no clue as to who this guy named Jesus was. And I probably never would have if it weren't for a very persistent woman named Debbie Zacharias. You see, Karen and I had a camera store and a photography studio directly across the street from the East Stroudsburg United Methodist Church. And like many churches, this church had a lot of community events, and they had speakers in, and they had flea markets and dinners and all sorts of things going on, very much like we do here now. And Karen and I had a lot of interactivity with the people from the church. You see, we had a 1-hour photo business at that time, and when people still used film, we saw a lot of their members, probably 20 to 30 people a day from that church developing their pictures with us, including the minister that was there at the time and his wife, because they were customers of ours also. And we talked with them and the other members all the time about the trips they took, about their families, and all sorts of stuff. So let's break down those numbers for a moment. Let's say that if we take all of that together, the 20 or 30 people a week from the church, the dinners they had that we went to, there was probably 100 people. And in the events that they had, maybe another 80 to 100 people. So that's about 200 individuals a year we ran into from the church. And that's a fair number of people, right? Now, let me ask you another question. If we were to take all of the members, including the pastor and the staff, how many people do you think reached out to us over that 20-year period who invited us to attend a service, a Bible study, or to participate in the life of the church? What's your guess? Probably a lot, right? 200 people over 20 years? How many? How about one? One person in 20 years asked us to attend something at that church other than an event or a dinner. And I think anybody here would probably say that's pretty awful. I mean, these folks went to church every week. They were part of committees, many of them leaders, and one of them actually was the pastor. And many of them we knew personally as customers. Only one person in 20 years ever invited us to a church service. But let me ask you another question. What do you think happened when that one person invited us to church? I went. And if it hadn't been for that invitation, I may not have found Christ. I might not have understood the importance of bringing others to Christ, and I definitely would not be standing here today and have become a pastor. So if you want to ever blame someone next time I ask you to do something or preach a bad sermon, you can blame Debbie Zacharias. And I'm not the only one whose life she touched. Because in addition to me, this woman was also instrumental in the lives of two other people who also became pastors. And I think that's pretty good. And Debbie loves to brag about that, although bragging was not her motive. Because in addition to me, how many people do you think that she asked to come to church? Probably hundreds. Probably everybody she comes in contact with, and she does it not for her benefit, but because she understands the importance of bringing other people to Christ. And I want to tell you today how she does it, because it might help us do the same thing. But before we get into how she does her thing, I want to talk to you something about her talent a little bit more, that might make it a little bit more relevant to you, by telling you a little bit about a hobby my dad and I love. And that hobby is called saltwater fishing. See, for my dad, fishing is even more than just a hobby. For him, it's a passion. And because of that passion, my dad is probably the best saltwater fisherman who lives in a place called Montauk, New York, which some of you might know as the striped bass capital of the world. And he has this unique ability to be able to catch fish when everybody else is just standing around the beach with nothing else on their lines. And when you talk to him, if you can get him to talk to about his secrets, you soon realize that fishing isn't something he learned in a single day. It's something he spends a lot of time studying and learning about. But there's something else about my dad and fishing, and that is that he doesn't like to share his secrets with anyone. And when I started putting together this sermon, I began to see a lot of similarities and dissimilarities about how people share things that are important to them in the church. You see, when I say he has a love of fishing, I have to explain it this way, by saying that even though he's getting a little bit older now, he gets up every morning before sunrise, he eats breakfast, hops in his four-wheel drive, and goes to the beach and fishes for a few hours. After that, he comes home, he eats lunch, he takes a nap, and then he puts his stuff together, his tackle and his bait, and he goes fishing until dinner. And then after dinner, he rests a little bit, and then he goes out again until about an hour after it gets dark. And when I talk to him about fishing, or he talks with a few of his fishing buddy that he does trust, he talks to us about water temperature and the type of bait fish that are in the water, the time of year, the tides. He can describe to you how to look at the surface of the water to see where the fish are schooling. And he'll tell you what is in the water by looking at what's on the beach. And because he has charts about the tides and water flows, he can tell you what time to fish and where to fish. And when he's not fishing, he spends all winter long in the basement making plugs on his lathe, and he pours his own lead into molds which he has designed himself and he makes by hand himself. Now you'd think that someone with that much passion for a hobby, with such a skill for it, that he would want to share it with anyone who asked. But I've been with him when he's caught 4 or 5 40-plus pound striped bass, and somebody will ask him how the fishing is, and he'll look him right in the eyes and say, "Nothing out there." And I want to fall over. Now, it's not that he doesn't have a skill to teach others, or that there aren't a whole lot of fish in the ocean. Or even that he doesn't like to talk to people because he has skill. He used to teach people new skills when he worked for the New York Telephone Company. And it isn't like there aren't enough fish in the sea, because there's tons of fish in the ocean. And it isn't like he doesn't like to talk, because if you ask him a question about sports or politics or fishing, you better have a few hours. But when it comes to sharing what is the thing that is most important to him, he doesn't like to share. And have you ever noticed in some churches that a lot of parishioners act like that? People who go to church every week, people who come here early and stay late and decorate the church around the holidays, or raise money fundraising, or involved in Vacation Bible School, teach Sunday school, and an infinite number of other things that go on in church. But at the same time, sometimes, not always, but sometimes when a stranger comes in for the first time, they don't share what they love. And I think that's horrible. And I think it's one reason why here at Bensalem people come back, because we do share what we love. And I really wonder sometimes why do people do that? What is it that stops people from sharing Jesus Christ with others? And I understand for some people it might come from being shy. I understand that, but for some people it comes from a sense of protecting what they love. Like if they gave it away, they'd lose it. So I have to start thinking about why this happens, and I wondered if it might not come from the way we describe what we love. Because as Methodists, we're always talking about this thing called a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You've heard people say that, right? But what does that mean? Because when we say it out loud, it sort of sounds like a good thing. All of us should have that relationship with Jesus Christ. Being in a relationship allows us to grow deeper in our faith. It allows us to know what to do when we're faced with tough choices in our lives, right? We understand when we're in a relationship with him personally that we can turn to him at any time and ask him what we should do. But I think a lot of times when we think about personal relationships, we make the mistake of thinking of that relationship only in individual terms. But you see, the personal relationship that Christ calls us to is larger than just him and us. It's his call to the disciples. In his call to the disciples, he called them to think of themselves as a larger family that was in relationship with each other. In the upper room, the upper room, Jesus talks about the church and his followers as being vines and branches. In Matthew 28:19, Jesus says for us to go into the world and make followers of all people in the world. See, he never said, don't share me. He instructed us just the opposite. He instructs us to share him with everyone, what he has taught us. But that's tough, isn't it? I mean, not all of us are Debbie Zachariases. Not all of us are free with our faith that we can do that, but we have to learn because it's important. And there are so many easy opportunities for us to share Christ with others. And I want to share two stories you might recognize as things that might have happened to you, that might help you in the future to talk about your faith. One is something that just happened to me this past week. This past week on Tuesday, I got an email from someone that used to come to church here a while ago. And this person said that they were going through a real rough patch in their lives, that they felt lost, and that there were things that were going on that they didn't know how to deal with. And this person said that they really missed church, and they missed being around the folks that were here, and that without church that they really didn't feel any hope. So that was an easy one. I reached out to this person. I talked to them about a way to slowly work church back into their lives and become part of the body again. And when this person comes back, that I would find someone in the church to walk with them for a little bit. And so that was pretty easy. I wish I had them like that every week. It was easy because I'll bet if you look, there's probably 2 or 3 people a week who feel the same way. And all they're looking for is someone to help them. But what about someone who was like me? Someone who had no interest in church. I think we have to look at how Debbie did it. See, the first thing she did was she developed a personal relationship with Karen and I. We were sort of friends. She would talk to me about her husband who had a business in town. I had a business. And he was a member of the school board, and she talked to me about her girls and about the activities that they were involved with the sports and the school. And she talked about the vacations that they went on. And she also talked about how she dealt with problems in her life. But there was something else that she didn't have to say. You see, we saw something in their lifestyle that other people didn't do. When they were around us, they never cursed. We never saw them drink too much when we went out to dinner. Their home in their business. Although they were modest, they were neat and clean. When they spoke about their marriage, they spoke about it positively. When they talked about their girls dating, they spoke about the girls' morals and ethics. When we saw Debbie and her husband in a public place, they held hands. They didn't fight. Now, this was not Ozzie and Harriet, if you know who those people are. They had problems in their lives, just like all of us do. And I remember one time in the store that Bill, Debbie's husband, he was talking to me about his dad getting sick and dying. And his wrestling with his having to put his mom into a nursing home because they could no longer care for her. But when they talked about it, they talked about their problem. They talked about something important. They talked about their faith. And that their faith told them that things were going to be okay. And each time we talked with them, they shared their faith quietly, but with conviction. The life they lived in the world matched up with the faith they proclaimed in their church life. You see where I'm going with this? It was easy for me to see someone without faith, how someone with faith had something that I did not have. And the more that I saw this, and the more I wondered what they had that I didn't have. So one day when we were talking, I talked to her about something that was going on in my life. And Debbie invited me to a Bible study that the church was having, and it was called The Purpose-Driven Life. And she said that it might answer some of the questions that I had. And I don't really remember how I ended up there, but I'm glad I went, because in that study I was teamed up with a fella there named Bruce. And throughout the study I began to find answers that I was looking for, and I also found something else there. I found Christ. You see, it wasn't a hard sell on Debbie's part. She led me by her example. And I saw in her a sense of calm that other people didn't have. And she opened the door, Christ grabbed on, and I became a Christian. See, it's not that hard to do. And I'll admit, some people make it look easy, but it's really not that hard. And that's why I started today talking about the opportunities we had over the past week. The number of people who came through our doors, the folks who were here that might have been looking to you to be a friend, to walk with them through their journey, to open the door that will lead them to Christ. And we might not have seen it. But there's a chance for us to make that right. In a few weeks, believe it or not, Christmas is going to be here. And a lot of time, Christmas and Easter is a time when people feel that they have to go to church. Sometimes people come to church at Christmas because it's a place that brings back memories of years gone by when they came to church with their families. It's also a time, though, when people feel lonely and lost. And so we need to be ready for the opportunity to share our faith with these folks. And so starting the week after Thanksgiving, on Sunday, we're going to begin planning for Christmas. We're going to have postcards printed to advertise the 3 Christmas services that we're going to have here, and we're going to ask you to hand them out. And we're already in the process of planning on what we can do to make those Christmas Eve services attractive to new people and to folks who we might not have seen for a while, or that we only see once in a while. And then the night of Christmas Eve, at all 3 services, we're going to have postcards printed up and announcements made up so that people will see a message advertising, a January message that will be relevant to them, so that these folks will have a reason to come to church more than just Christmas and Easter. Each one of us has a responsibility to share our faith with others. Each of us has a responsibility to make our faith real to others and relevant to everyone who seeks Him. And it's our job. It's your job and it's my job to make each and every person understand why Christ is important to us. And by doing that, we will introduce each and every one of them to what it is that we find attractive in the one we call Christ, and how only Christ can make a change in their lives. Would you pray with me? Gracious Lord our God, Lord, you make it look so easy. Lord, you speak 11 words to people and they follow you. They drop their nets, they leave their boats, they just move on, Lord. But Lord, for us, we're like Moses. We know you want us to lead. You know you want us to move into that land of milk and honey through the wilderness. But Lord, we have a tough time speaking. We have a tough time, Lord, telling about what we feel inside of us. So Lord, I ask you to have your Holy Spirit put a special blessing on us today. Lord, I ask you to give us words to have that thing that's inside of us flow out of our hearts into our mouths, to have us be able to speak your words, to give those reassuring, comforting words that, and talk about that gift of salvation that we have, Lord. Lord, to repent of what we've been doing, to turn around and to accept you, to be justified through grace alone.